Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are very excited to be joined today by Daniel Carcillo. Very excited to talk about what's been going on in the psychedelics medicine space and just his work in general with psychedelics. I think it's a really interesting story he has, and really excited to bring that to you guys. Just a good reminder out there before we jump in, if you guys have any questions, comments, you're always welcome to throw them in the chat. We will try to get to them as we go. But Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it, especially after a long weekend. I feel like it's hard to shake off the rest and relaxation. How are you doing?
Good. Hey, what's up, Steve? Yeah, we were traveling. I was traveling to Oregon last week. We also had a really amazing investor event in New York. We had 2 days with our bank partner, financial advisor, and Piper Sandler. So a lot of institutional meetings on top of the 55 check writers that were in the room. But it's all very, very necessary, and it all coincides with my life's mission now, which is to try to expand access and get individuals connected to the right emerging medicines to improve their lives and help with any neurological or psychiatric disorders that they may be ailing from.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Again, a lot of hard work. Sorry to hear that you didn't get a bit of a break, but glad to hear that you're doing the work because it is really important.
I got some sleep Saturday. I made sure to prioritize. Yeah.
Well, I feel like you do talk a lot about having sort of the holistic approach to wellness, which I think is important. I know psychedelics can be a part of that, but also getting sleep, also eating well and all that, which I think is really important. So that is
Absolutely.
good in general. So I do want to talk about what you're currently working on because I know you're working on a ton, but I do want to zoom back a little bit and kind of just talk about, your personal connection to psychedelics. I know you have a lot of great content on your social media, on X or Twitter, that kind of goes through your story, but effectively you got your life back through psychedelics and you've become this hugely strong advocate for psychedelic medicine, kind of to help others in that same way. I know a lot of people don't share your story exactly the same. No one's a Stanley Cup 2-time winner probably, but I think a lot of people deal with stuff that psychedelics can help with. So I'd love to just kind of start there, going through your story a little bit before we kind of walk through what you've been working on lately.
Cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking. So yeah, not a lot of people are maybe have the background that I had as far as, there's only about 750 or so guys that play in the NHL every year. But I think, when people are interested or called towards understanding or learning more about these emerging medicines and these psychedelic compounds, that means that they want to improve something in their life. And you don't have to be an athlete, you don't have to be a veteran, you don't have to be an executive, you don't have to necessarily, make a lot of money in order to improve your life. And so some of the things that we talk about in the community on my Instagram page is prioritizing exercise or movement. Some people don't even like the word exercise, so we say just move.
Sure. Yeah.
And sleep, alcohol intake, sugar intake, mindset, your perspective, how you view the world, and things like meditation and breath work. But also, if individuals are having a hard time trying to change their life naturally, then that's where this medicine work comes in. And there's a lot of really amazing work that's going into policy reform across, I think there's now 23 states that are in some form of adult therapeutic use legislation, specifically with psilocybin. And that's how I got better. I chose to do my own research, which is another thing that we share in the community and on the webinars freely, in order to point people towards John Hopkins and their studies and NYU Langone and these major academic institutions, as well as what's happening in the drug development landscape. 37% of all clinical trials are now through the FDA are being done on psychedelic or psychedelic related molecules, which is really amazing. And then it's really about empowering people to just kind of make their own educated decision, because I'm sure a lot of people have, maybe been in and around a friend or a loved one that maybe needs some help, and the people around them want them to get the help more than that individual, and it usually doesn't work. So trying to make sure that people can have this information freely and then make a better decision to hopefully improve their lives is something that we're really passionate about.
Yeah, that's fantastic work to be doing. Is it kind of strange at all to look back, like you're saying, I think currently there's been more embracing of psychedelics for medicine. I think you're right in saying that there's a lot more research, a lot more
Mm.
studies, and a lot more kind of IP moving through, where it can become available to people who really need it. But I know we're almost, I guess, a year and some out from you leaving the NHL. And I feel like 10 years ago, it was so, so different. Is it weird to kind of zoom it? How has it changed and really evolved since a decade almost?
Yeah, there was little to no research, or at least it wasn't in the media. And I think people were still very scared to report on it because back in 2003, so in my draft year, when I got drafted to the NHL, I was 17 years old, turning 18.
Crazy.
And that's right when John Hopkins started to pick up this research again, because with the war on drugs and how stigmatized it was almost academic death if you tried to pick up one of these compounds and work with them. So 2003, they started working with them. One of their first studies was on end of life for terminally ill cancer patients with anxiety as well as smoking cessation. And nobody really knew about it, and then they started to do studies on how some of these specifically psilocybin was working in the brain, Alzheimer's, depression, indications that are sometimes intractable or incurable. And I didn't know about it. I mean, I retired in 2015. There wasn't Michael Pollan, writing his book yet. There weren't Netflix specials on it. There
Yeah.
weren't athletes talking about, how they use it to enhance their athletic performance both before the season and then as a recovery tool. So it's been really nice to see the kind of evolution of, you know, I'm sure I don't know how much you've been in the industry, Mackenzie, but there's a lot of really strong personalities. Let's just say that where
Sure.
the people, there's a couple ways to access this information, but some of the people don't want to highlight the drug development path. But all of in my view, there's a decrim nature path, there's an adult therapeutic use path, and then there's the medical path, which is synthetic. And it has to be medicalized, and we actually use the FDA studies and all of the academic studies that use synthetic medicine to then open up these decriminalized states as well as these adult therapeutic use states. So they really go hand in hand. And it was a major reason why I decided to go in 2019 to Denver and do this medicine, which completely saved my life after 7 diagnosed concussions and being told that I had mild dementia from medical professionals.
Again, it's fantastic to see how much you've been able to reclaim your life. I think it's so important, and be able to pass on sort of what how you've benefited for others, I think is super important. And also interesting to kind of highlight, like you're saying, the synthetic psilocybin. I wonder if there's skepticism around it, because I know a lot of the times people who are interested in sort of the natural medicines want sort of very, very natural focused. But I do think with the kind of controlled or synthesized psilocybin, you can control for a lot of different things, like the time period, the duration, and all of those things as well, that can kind of really custom fit certain people who are struggling with certain types of things. So very interesting to see, and just great to see that those options are available for people, I think, in general.
Yeah, I mean, who are we to bash one or the other, right? I mean, if some people can afford to go to adult therapeutic use states with full spectrum natural medicine, then good on them, and there's a lot of really great organizations that are raising money to help subsidize and a lot of what happens in Oregon's the first state that's open for business for adults over 21 that can use psilocybin.
Mhm.
In order to open up one of these service centers, you have to have a social equity plan, and you have to make sure that you are hitting that social equity plan, or else your license will be revoked. So there's a lot of this kind of Robin Hood model where people that can pay for it, you charge them accordingly, and that trickles down to the veteran organizations, and that trickles down to the first responders and to people that can't afford this therapy. So yeah, there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good work. And the synthetic path is really important. I had a drug development program, and understanding that medication needs to be easily replicatable within a 0.1% variance, or else you can't make it for
Mhm.
people, for millions of people. That's one of the reasons that synthetic medicine exists. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great to see that these are kind of curative measures for the sickest of the sick, right? For treatment-resistant depression patients who've tried 3 medications and it didn't work.
Well, so I think that's sort of the wildest thing to me, and as we're seeing some of these drugs get developed and kind of come through the process, I think a lot of people are surprised and sort of, is it too good to be true in terms of the results that people are seeing? Which I guess makes sense. I mean, the fact that it can fully kind of undo a lot of the damage that previously had been really, really, really difficult to address is
Mm.
fantastic, but again, glad that it's there and glad that we're able to use it, so I'm not gonna
Yeah.
question it for now.
And, I think one of the things that we need to make sure we highlight is that, these aren't panaceas, right? These
Of
aren't
course.
these aren't medicines that you kinda go in and you take, and then all of a sudden, you're okay for the rest of your life. Life still happens, stress still happens, but let's talk about MDMA for PTSD since that's, the first classic psychedelic that will come to market hopefully here. They're getting a first round review right now, and hopefully I'm hearing like mid-August.
Mm,
But that cures people of PTSD 71% of the time. But it's not just doing MDMA. It's also, the program's a 12-week program, and it's associated with 90 plus hours of psychotherapy, of talk therapy.
mm,
And then, yes, you go into a brick and mortar and you do the medicine, and these will always be done inside a brick and mortar. People won't be able to take them home, hence why we've partnered with physicians, and we're trying to help with Healing Realty Trust. But I think that's a really important distinction, is that talk therapy is a very, very, very big part of the results. And it's pretty amazing that, yeah, 71% of people after they go through this program no longer qualify for a PTSD diagnosis.
that's fantastic. Yeah, you're right, I guess it's not something that you can just take in isolation and hope that that fixes everything. You need that sort of support, to kind of get
Hmm.
through it, which makes sense. Well, so let's talk a little bit about Healing Realty Trust. Seems like, again, the clinic component, very important. How did you start that? How did it come to be? When did you decide, like, not enough clinics, we need to address this problem? What was sort of the impetus there?
So I owned and operated 2 psychiatrist-led clinics in Illinois,
Mhm.
and we ended up expanding into a third location because we got those up to 100% capacity. And I had 2 different business lines, well, actually 3, but at the time 2. I was running an FDA drug development program using the method that helped me get better,
Mhm.
and taking that and communicating with drug developers. And then I was also running the delivery side of the medicine. And I had to take money from the FDA drug development program to expand our clinical footprint. And there was no REIT, which is a real estate investment trust, that was kind of partnering with physicians or clinics like myself to do that expansion. Now, one thing that's really important to know, although these are psychiatrist-led clinics that were doing classic med management and talk therapy, because ketamine, which is FDA approved through Johnson and Johnson, it's called S-ketamine Spravato. It's a Schedule 3, so it's still scheduled. So banks like Bank of America, Chase, they will not lend money to us, similar to how they won't lend money to bars or just certain business
Cannabis.
lines.
Mhm.
Yeah, cannabis, exactly. And so
Sure.
it was really difficult and it put a lot of stress on the business. So I started to chat with Cody Chandra, who was then running Ambria Capital, who a lot of people know in the industry. And he was one of the first checks into Wisana, and he comes from the capital markets, and he was talking about businesses like IIPR, which has a $1 billion book which specifically focuses on lending to the cannabis space because you can't get that traditional lending. So we started to toss around this idea, back then, and for a year and a half we didn't really do anything. And then I started to kind of wind down that business, and we sold the drug development program to a NASDAQ listed company. We ended up selling the clinics, and we picked this idea up. And a year and a half ago, we founded the company, and now we are, in an active Series A raise, and we're about to close on our first 2 properties in the next 40 days. And
Wow.
it's yeah,
Mm.
it's very, very exciting. And our thesis was that these psychedelic assisted therapy clinics, or people, at least physicians and psychiatrists that had these clinics that were using ketamine and that had good therapists that were going to want to bring in MDMA, they're going to need help because this clinical infrastructure does not exist for long duration rooms where you need supervision and two therapists and a washroom. You don't want to be walking somebody out into the lobby with bright lights, etc. So it's a little bit nuanced. And yeah, we just started to execute on it. And so now, we are mainly focused on just looking for healthcare related income generating assets that we can partner with really good physicians that are underwritable and expand their existing or new clinical footprint.
That's fantastic. Again, great work to see. So you said you mentioned you were meeting sort of with institutions kind of on those raises. Are people understanding the benefits and understanding kind of the potential with these things? Or is it still sort of on the outside? Is it what's sort of the feedback you guys are getting?
So it was really interesting. It was really psychedelic focused, right? That we were going to, so not a lot of people know, but there was, and this has been said in the media, but there was a report that Boston Consulting Group did on how many of these clinics were going to be needed to be propped up in order to treat 1.1 million people for PTSD using MDMA by 2030, or I believe 2031. And they estimated to treat the 1.1 million people, there's over 9.8 million PTSD survivors, so about 10% of the market. That 16,000 clinics needed to be built by 2031. And that was an alarming number because right now I believe there's just under 30 sites, and this medicine is supposed to get approval very soon. So we started to really work off of that thesis and started to kind of reach out to physicians and people that we knew in the network. And just from my days with running those clinics, we were looking to expand. So we had some contacts and we started to really hone in and build a deck around this thesis. Now, a lot of these clinics either aren't kind of ready for this type of expansion, or B, just won't pass kind of underwriting. So the thesis quickly evolved, as most businesses do, into looking at legacy behavioral health providers that are just going to want to add in MDMA for PTSD or ketamine, FDA approved, to their existing practice. So we've been writing a lot of legacy types of businesses like that, renovating or doing some TI, but really just honing in on healthcare related assets. And that was kind of a big change. But when we were in New York this week, with this round that we almost have 75% filled, a lot of people are doing the round, number one, because of the team, number two, because of the two properties that we're putting under contract, but number three, because of the alpha, or the blue sky, which is to execute on helping underwrite and then expand these psychedelic medicine clinics. And so we found our first meeting, was with one of the biggest banks in the nation. And at the end of the meeting, one of the individuals, everybody has a personal connection to somebody suffering from mental health. And so it's definitely been received really well. And a lot of the institutions really wanted to just hone in on the alpha, which would be the understanding of these medicines and how many of them are moving through the clinical landscape, and the simple fact that all of these medicines will have to be done in a brick and mortar. So it's being very well received.
That's fantastic. So then again, your footprint now more West Coast. Is the goal to kind of deepen in the current markets? Is it to eventually, I guess you're already growing the extra spots. How do you sort of figure out where you want to move into
Yeah,
effectively?
so we're agnostic as far as, we're in all 48 states, and we are really just looking at, tenants and our strict underwriting process, right?
Okay.
And so understanding where the debt markets are right now, and one of our advantages is we're playing in a kind of sub-institutional level. So we're hunting for deals between 1 and 15 million, where most of the big REITs and all the other big boys are out there with 50 million or above. They won't even look. So
Mhm.
we're kind of competing against mom and pop, which gives us a really big advantage. And we're seeing cap rates in excess of 10% on our first two deals. So it's from an investor standpoint, it's very exciting. And there's not a lot of opportunities in your life to be able to do good
Yes.
and do well. So yeah, it's a really exciting project. And we have an amazing team, right? And I come from the world of playing on a team and creating trying my best anyway to create a culture of execution. So we wouldn't be able to do this without our team and without our CEO Joe Caltabiano. And we brought on Jared Chapila, who's been amazing, and Aaron Robb, who's a real estate analyst, and obviously Cody and our president, and the whole real estate team has been really gelling well. So yeah, it's going to be exciting here in the next 60 to 90 days as we start to tell the world a little bit more about the announcements coming down the pipeline.
That's very cool. Again, I think I said it at the top, but definitely recommend following your Instagram and your X and or Twitter, just because I think you do post a lot of great stuff there, especially for anyone who's interested in psychedelics and, of course, what you guys are working on as well.
Thank you.
Um, of course, would love to talk a little bit about sort of the psychedelic industry as a whole as it's developing. Are there any like big hurdles that you think are holding things back from really, really accelerating? Is it um, you know, number of people who are trained to kind of administer this medicine? Is it acceptance? Is it what sort of is there anything that you would wish is that you could sort of move beyond? Without-
Yeah, I know exactly what you're.
Thanks.
So, I mean, Healing Realty Trust was born out of a need, and there is little to no infrastructure. So that's an issue, and we're trying to address that. And then facilitators and therapists that are going to sit both in the FDA trials and beyond. That is a little bit of a concern for sure. And these people are being trained right now, but I mean, healing and people and then revenue associated with that is going to be directly correlated to how many of these people are available and qualified. And so those two things are a little bit concerning, but it's always been a kind of slow roll when you see these new kind of therapies come to market, similar to Spravato, which is now going to be a blockbuster drug. But in 2019, 5 years ago, there's little to no infrastructure, and so it had a really hard time. It wasn't even on Johnson and Johnson's balance sheet, and now it's going to be $1 billion drug because there's 27 or almost 2,800 ketamine clinics. So it'll follow that line, and we'll take it slow, and payers are going to take it slow as well, and the landscape is going to evolve. And I wouldn't say like the first through the wall is bloodiest, but the first through the wall carves the path, and it takes a little bit more effort to pave a new road than to fix it. So
That's
um
true.
anyway, like that, but it's still like really exciting to kind of like, not to kind of, but to be at this in this
Yeah,
industry, in this forefront. And I think
for
too,
sure.
what we've seen, and Mackenzie, you've probably seen this, there was so much hype like back in 2020 and 20, like 2021, when the market was just ripping and nobody can do anything wrong. And for the
Mhm.
last year and a half, you haven't really heard much, and it's starting to pick up a little bit now. But you'll see a lot of the people that began in 2018, 19 that are still here, and some of the kind of like Canadian capital markets guys have gone on to a new emerging industry, which is AI and some other things. So, um, you know, the access and also the adult therapeutic use and the legislation and the policy work that's happening around the nation that not a lot of people know about. There's 23 states with some form of adult therapeutic use or just legislation similar to what Utah just passed, where they're going to be prescribing psilocybin and MDMA in May. The governor gave permission through the University of Utah. And so that's really exciting. There is the Cure Act in Illinois, and a bunch of the people that we work with just met with the governor last week, so that's moving along. We had board rules that were the first draft of rules for Colorado, which is Prop 122, which is going to be the second adult therapeutic use state for psilocybin. And, there's Vermont, there's Massachusetts, there's Wisconsin, there's Michigan, there's California. There are a lot of states that are
It'd be
working.
faster to list the states that don't have anything, it seems like, which is great.
Seriously,
I
you
mean, that's what
could,
we want to
yeah.
see.
It's amazing, and some of these are kind of bills, to just put funding in the hands of researchers that could help veterans and first responders and the like. So it's just a really cool time to be alive and to be working in this field for sure.
Yep, definitely agree. And I think also on the investment side, I know you mentioned 2020 and things were sort of crazy in general, investment wise. But I do think now with, rates aren't cut yet, but they seem like they're going to be cut eventually. It's still on track. I know market is hitting kind of all-time highs. I think people are kind of getting a little bit more comfortable with, um, really looking at psychedelics again. I think so. That's exciting too. I think it's time. I think ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah, and, MindMed, FDA breakthrough therapy designation, LSD to treat generalized anxiety disorder, and, Cybin with their deuterated psilocybin molecule, and off of the heels of FDA breakthrough therapy dezegation and some of their data, they raised 150 million.
Yep.
MAPS raised, I think 100 or 150 million to commercialize and market. So, you're seeing money being put back in, and I think there's investors get a little itchy. They can only sit on the sidelines for so long, and it's an election year, so there's still some unknowns, but it's nice to see that people are starting to kind of look at this industry again and put money behind it.
Yeah, again, I think with all the data coming out, it's kind of hard to ignore, which is great. And ultimately, people like you pushing kind of the message out and sort of the education around it, which is important as well. I know. Would love to talk just briefly. I know we mentioned the webinars and I think we mentioned podcasting and everything. Can you tell
Hmm.
us a little bit more about how you're kind of getting, because I know you're speaking to investors as well, but also just speaking to the general public in terms of making them aware about what's going on and kind of giving them some educational components. Can you talk about, kind of what you cover a little bit, where people can find it as well as another good thing?
Sure. Yeah. So people can find me on Instagram and on X. Instagram, it's Daniel Carcillo 13. And then on X, it's Carbomb Boom 13.
Mhm.
And we just talk a lot about, you could join the broadcast channel, which I checked today. It's over 700 people strong now.
Nice.
And yeah, we just talk a lot about, mushroom therapies and what has helped. And when I say, therapies and exercise and movement and prioritizing sleep and mindset and how we recover and all of these things are things that like either I or some of the speakers that I invite have done to
Mhm.
live a happy and fulfilling and successful life. And it's not easy. It takes commitment, but the community is there to help support people, number one, and then number two, help hold people accountable, because I think we all need a little bit of accountability. And so the webinars are just basic information about, well, what is a mushroom ceremony? What is a mushroom journey? How do you prepare for it? What happens during it? What happens afterwards? And so we talk a lot about, what's happening in Oregon, and we're opening up our first clinic there, which will be open in the next, 60 to 70 days, which is really exciting.
Exciting.
And we just give people this information, so and then put forward all of the studies, etc., and where to find this, and also mushroomreferences.com, which is like lion's mane and reishi and cordyceps and chaga, agarikon, turkey tail, oyster, maitake, shiitake, like all of these other mushrooms that have all had clinical trials attached to them to show either neurological benefits or anti-inflammatory benefits or benefits for the nervous system or for sleep. And just really highlighting, a lot of natural medicine routines and protocols. I'm not a doctor,
Yeah, that's
and
great. You do
there's a
enough already, I think. You
there's
don't
a
need to.
disclaimer there,
Mhm.
but I really do love empowering people with information, and so that they can make an educated decision to try
Yeah.
to improve their lives or the lives of their loved ones.
That's fantastic. Do you think ultimately people, when they're hesitant to try or they're learning about it in general, do you think it's just sort of a lack of knowledge in general, or do you think that there's still some overhang of kind of the drug war? Are there any sort of things that people still misunderstand about psychedelics still hanging around, or is that really cleared up?
I do think that there's still stigma.
Okay.
And I was looking on YouTube the other day, and there was like a partnership with the Drug Free America. And I don't know if you ever
Oh,
remember, but that guy who's like, "This is your brain," and it
on
was a hot
drugs.
pan, and "This is your
Yeah.
brain on drugs." He cracks
The
an
egg.
egg. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is what." So I'm sure that it's that, but it's also just the unknown, and everybody is pretty fearful about anything that they don't know or understand. So that's where the community came from. That's where
Yeah.
this information gets freely given, and then hopefully people will have the confidence enough to partake and improve their lives. And I will say, nobody gets nobody gets called to this work by accident. People that are interested in looking at having some of these therapies done, it's they I think they know that it can benefit their lives and improve their lives. So
Yep, again, it's great to have those other tools and not having to do it alone to kind of have
mhm,
support through it, which is super important. All right, let me go through some
absolutely.
questions really quickly
Cool.
before we round up. All right, let's see. We have, hey Dan, does MCD still have a partnership with Psyched Wellness to provide Amarata Muscara extract?
So no, they do not. No,
That's fair enough.
they've moved the company into a different direction.
There you go. Fair enough. Also, again, another great story where someone else is using mushrooms to help them deal with depression and anxiety. So it's great to see, great to hear.
Love it.
I
Yeah,
love
keep
it.
sharing testimonials for sure. It helps other people.
Feel
Um,
comfortable.
absolutely.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time. Really, really, really appreciate it. Definitely recommend, again, everyone subscribe on YouTube and follow along on X for Daniel. Because again, there's so much great stuff there. Really, really recommend. But thanks for taking the time. And I think we will catch you later. Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thanks, Mackenzie.
All right. We'll catch you later. Bye.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at advisorshares.com.